I just finished the film, Mr. Pollard.
Oh, good.
It was a great film.
Thank you.
I had to clean up my eyes a little bit.
All right, we're streaming live now on YouTube. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Mark Anastasio. I'm the Director of Special Programming here at the Coolidge Corner Theatre. You're here with us tonight for a panel discussion on the film MLK FBI from director Sam Pollard. I wanted to start just by thanking everyone that has been supporting us throughout the last year, for everyone that has donated. The Coolidge is a nonprofit theater. And for everyone who has supported by engaging with us in these virtual Q&As and discussions, and for renting films in our virtual screening room. Our Coolidge members are able to see MLK FBI now. So if you're a member of the Coolidge, you should have received an email detailing how you can watch the film. But I just wanted to express those thanks for being with us and keeping us going over the last year. I'm very happy that we are joined tonight by the director of MLK FBI, Sam Pollard, is here with us. We also have Massachusetts State Representative Nika Elugardo on the panel. And tonight, the panel will be moderated by Bernard Greene, who is the chair of the Brookline Select Board, as well as the chair of the Brookline Martin Luther King Celebration Committee. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and for everyone that is watching via our YouTube live stream of this conversation. There is a chat window on the right of the screen where you can enter questions. Please feel free to ask those questions when they come up, and we will get them to our moderator when the time comes for audience Q&A. But I'd like to turn things over to Bernard. Thanks, Bernard.
Thank you, Mark. And since you introduced me as the chair of the Brookline Select Board and the chair of the Martin Luther King Celebration Committee, I don't have to go into those matters, and I can just jump into this. Tonight we have an amazing, incredible program for you. A panel discussion with Sam Pollard, the director of a very interesting and actually incredible film called MLK FBI. So you know what that's about. And we also have in this panel discussion, Nika Elugardo, state representative for primarily precincts in Boston, but also our favorite Boston representative who also represents Precinct 5 in Brookline. And you know, someone who has really been an incredible asset for the town of Brookline, as she is for her Boston precincts too. So we're gonna talk about the film MLK FBI, and I'd like to just start off by asking the two of you if you'd like to sort of introduce yourself in any further way. Or say anything to...
I would just say thank you for having me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Oh, we're very honored to have you in this conversation. Nika.
Same, I would say it's an incredible honor. I continue to be pleasantly surprised when you bring me into these conversations with those who are capturing our heroes on film. And I look very much forward to hearing from Mr. Pollard in particular. And I hope that we can hear about the emotional journey of directing such a film, as well as the intellectual one.
Yeah, that's going to be my first question, matter of fact. But first, I'd like to just say that this is one of many events that the Martin Luther King Celebration Committee holds during the year, in addition to our big event on Martin Luther King Day. So anyway, let me start off with a question to Mr. Pollard. Talk to us about the, I guess, ethical issues that filmmakers like yourself face when working with material that has very, very important historical value, but is, in this case, so defamatory of an important historical person, Martin Luther King, as well as defamatory of Black people generally. What do you think about in terms of whether to work with this material and how you edit the material out so it's not going to be offensive to some people?
Well, I think, Nika and Bernard, the challenge was basically we're documenting the ascendancy of Dr. King in the 50s and the 60s, and how on the parallel side to this story is how the FBI, under the executive directorship of J. Edgar Hoover, was trying to discredit and destroy Dr. King's reputation. And you should look at it really more as a film about our secret police, the FBI being a secret police that's basically going to any lengths to destroy a civil rights leader who they saw as a radical, who was trying to basically propagate the idea that Black people should be equal to white people, which clearly J. Edgar Hoover and many Americans at that time didn't believe should happen. There was always this question: why are you guys trying to rush so much to become equal? Why can't you take your time? Why are you peaceful protesters causing riots in the cities? So it's not so much about digging into Dr. King so much as looking at the links that the FBI would go to destroy him. Now, the complexity of the story is the fact that even though I revere and respect Dr. King, he didn't walk on water. He wasn't God to me, So he was a human being who had his own issues and his own flaws, but we understand that he was on a journey, he had a mission, and that was complicated by who he was and the people around him and the people who were trying to destroy him. So that's the film we were trying to make. I always say to people, I grew up in a household in 1960s in New York City, where if you walked into our living room, we had 3 images on our wall: Martin Luther King Jr., John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and Jesus Christ. That was the Holy Trinity in our house, So that's where I stood in terms of Dr. King back then. But as a young man, I had only one perspective of Dr. King. He was a gentleman who had done I Have a Dream. He was going to bring all Americans, white kids and Black kids, together. But here I am, I'm a 70-year-old man now, and life is not that simple, and it's much more complicated. So part of my journey and my responsibility as a filmmaker is to dig into that complexity of life.
So I guess in my view, the revelations in your film really aren't news. We knew about a lot of them.
Yeah.
Were there any new revelations that you're able to uncover with the availability of heretofore secret files of the FBI?
The only thing one of the things that surprised me as we were doing this film was I forgot. I didn't remember that when they took that poll in '64, that J. Edgar Hoover was more popular than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
Just think about it. Now Dr. King is like iconic, but obviously many Americans, Black and white, have a little bit of amnesia about how Dr. King was looked at by many of Americans back in the '60s. He wasn't, except for the Black community, he wasn't totally embraced. And by '67, as we all know, when he did his speech at the Riverside Church on April 4th, 1967, he not only destroyed his relationship with Lyndon Baines Johnson, but he even had caught brickbats from those in the civil rights community who said, Dr. King, you're stepping out of your lane. Why are you dealing with Vietnam when you should be focused on civil rights? What they forgot to understand about Dr. King, he wasn't just about civil rights, he was about human rights, for all people.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Nika what she thinks about, the issues of, revealing this information to the public and, its impact on, some Black people. It's there are a lot of painful things in this film. And, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, towards the end of the film, there's a brief discussion of whether or not the tapes should ever come, as one speaker said, to the light of day.
Yeah.
And I said to my husband after I heard that, if those tapes don't come to the light of day, it won't be to protect Martin Luther King, that's for sure. It'll be to protect the reputation of somebody else. or another institution like the FBI. I think the truth is important, even if it had been buried in the past. But I think what strikes me as even more arresting is the parallels between this story of the 60s and the story of 2021, particularly for the time being, culminating in the events of January 6th. Even seeing the Confederate flag being waved and used as a symbol of support for Hoover and what he stood for, and that 50+% or 50% of Americans, it reminded me of Trump and the 50% nearly of, folk, almost half the country came out, at least half the voters came out in support of Trump. And if Democrats hadn't turned out a lot more people than usual, we might not have been able to pull that out, because there are 70 million voters in the country that really believe that the supreme status of whiteness should really determine the culture of the country. And we haven't really unpacked that. We haven't really put the Civil War to rest. Even though I was surprised, I'm not gonna lie, I felt I shouldn't be shocked to see the Confederate flag being waved in the halls of the Capitol, because that's a representation of what was being said all along. I think of political figures today, like the Squad, the ways that people like Ayanna Pressley and Ilhan Omar and AOC are represented as being threats to society, because they challenge a concept that American identity is not defined centrally by American whiteness. And that is as frightening for people in 2021 as it was for them in 1968 and 56 and all in between the things we saw there. A question that I had, not to take over your moderating, Bernard, at all, but
go ahead.
A question that I had is, what is it like to do a film on history as you watch events unfold in today that question whether or not we have made any progress? Or do you see it in the way that I just described it? Do you see more progress than I do? And I'd love to be encouraged if you do.
Well, Nikki, I have to say to you, Nika, I'm sorry. Nika, I have to say to you that I saw the same thing. Watching some of the things unfold in this film was watching a reflection of what's happening in 2020. So for example, when the white woman on that television show asked Dr. King, don't you think your peaceful protests are causing riots in the cities? All you gotta do is look at the last summer when you heard Republican congressmen and Trump out there saying these Black Lives Matter people are causing the riots in the cities. When someone says about Dr. King is flirting with communism and communism is gonna destroy the fabric of American democracy, then it made me just look at 2020 when Trump was on the stump saying, if you vote in these socialist Democrats,
right?
They will destroy our suburbs. So it's like growing up in America, we all know, the three of us know that there's been significant changes for Black people in America. But on the other hand, the notion of whiteness is still there in the grasp of America's DNA. White people, quite honestly, they are so frightened of the idea that this country will become multiracial, multicultural, that they will do anything to keep it that way. When we saw those people attacking the Capitol on January 6th, to me, it wasn't like an anomaly. It was seeing white people doing that in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in Red Summer of 1919, in Harlem in the 1940s. Anytime they felt threatened, they want to destroy. And the other thing that American history has done, which is the reason that so many Southerners, I shouldn't say so many, but some Southerners believe that the South still won the war, is because America culturally has romanticized romanticize the Confederacy, you know, that it was, you know, these good old boys who were fighting to save their plantations. They don't talk about they were there trying to keep people, us and our ancestors enslaved, you know. So America has never wanted to deal with the reckoning that the blood of this country was built on the backs of Black people. They won't, you know, they have amnesia, you know. It wasn't me, you know, that was years ago. It was 100, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. We don't have anything to do with that. It's still in their DNA, you know.
It's still, the people are still alive from the time in the film. Like not everybody who was in that 50% in 1964, whenever that poll was done, is dead. I mean, they're still alive.
Exactly. So when you hear that white woman on the street says, "I don't like Dr. King because he's uppity."
Right.
Imagine. And you know that people still feel that way about him.
He thinks he knows so much. He thinks he's so smart.
Yeah. I mean, this is like, man, oh man. And all you got to do is, there was a picture last week of Trump's the Department of Defense staff, all white men.
Yeah.
In 2021, Nika, Bernard.
Yeah, I had a flashback all the way to 2016 when I saw Lyndon B. Johnson's White House.
Yeah, you saw that picture of Lyndon B. Johnson, all white men.
I was like, oh, that reminds me of way back in 2016 when Trump announced his people.
So I want to sort of get to the sort of, I consider it a painful piece of the movie, which I think, you know, is probably on the minds of people who've seen the movie, and that is the FBI wiretaps disclosing Martin Luther King's affairs with women. You know, it's interesting. Hoover didn't release those tapes, which, you know, sort of raises the question of why not. Do you have any thoughts on that? And it must have been something on there that was damaging.
Remember, he reached out to the press. He reached out to the media. He was trying to get the media to take on these stories and to exploit these things to really discredit King. But remember, you know, back in the 60s, the media didn't go that far. They didn't dig into the fact that John Kennedy was having all those extramarital affairs in the White House. They didn't dig into the fact that LBJ had some sturdy secrets. You know, they didn't do it then back then, not like the media does today. Everything would be open game to open season for people today in the media, but they didn't do it back in the 60s. That's why he could never get any traction. That's why he had William Sullivan create that letter, basically hoping that Dr. King would think that his constituency, this one person from his constituency would be so, upset with Dr. King, King would consider killing himself. I mean, this was beyond the pale in terms of what the FBI and Hoover were doing, beyond the pale. But he wasn't an outlier. We should all remember that. He wasn't like outlier. He was basically doing exactly what many Americans, how they felt about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You know, and
about Black people in general.
About Black people in general, because
especially Black men.
Because they're, you know, we all know this. They're basically saying, what's their problem? You know, they go into their communities. Sure, they can't, in the South, they can't sit on the bus with us. They can't sit on the front of the bus. They can't sit in the restaurants. What's the problem? You know, we're so used to seeing people like, you know, Stephen Fetchit and Willie Best and Mantan Moreland and Butterfly McQueen. Those are the kind of Black people that they should be happy. You know, it's amazing when you think about that mindset. That mindset. But you said it, Nika, you said it right. It's about the notion of whiteness. Whiteness, the idea that whiteness is front and center. I was telling somebody a few weeks ago, I watched an old film from 1942, and this young white girl was with Alan Ladd, and he was telling her she shouldn't hang out with these mobsters. And she says to him, and you heard this term, we've both heard this term. She said, "You can't tell me what to do because I'm free, white, and 21." Remember that phrase?
Yeah. So I want to actually commend you for how you dealt with the really inflammatory allegation of sexual assault.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, and maybe this is why they don't want to release it. It was very clear, as you showed, that this was just made up by the agents who didn't have a sightline to what was going on, but were still saying that King was watching, this event happen.
How do they know that? How can they know that if they're in another room listening? They're not.
But you put that in there, I think, very effectively. And then you talked about how the agents had an incentive to sort of agree with Hoover's sort of perverse view of Black people. Talk about that. I mean, including your use of some of these caricatures of Black people that were really, I was kind of shocked myself.
Despicable. But remember now, this gentleman they saw as a radical, even though he was a nonviolent, peaceful, leader of a movement. He was a radical who, in their understanding, was trying to upend American democracy. I mean, it's amazing. He's trying to upend American democracy, basically say we should be considered not second-class citizens. We should be equal to you. So they bought into this idea that he was someone who was a danger, like they bought into the idea that Malcolm was a danger, that the Nation of Islam, they were dangerous, that the Black Panther Party was dangerous, that Angela Davis was dangerous. Anytime anybody, and it was particularly Black people, left or center, challenged the notion of the American status quo, they become a danger. They become a danger. And that was the job of the FBI, to basically ferret out anybody who they felt was trying to deconstruct their notion of democracy. That's why they had informants, and other people involved in monitoring these organizations. That's why a man in the SCLC office was an informant for the FBI. And that gentleman is still alive and lives in Atlanta, Georgia. That's why Ernest Withers, who's a well-known photographer who took that wonderful picture of King and Abernathy on the bus after the Montgomery bus boycott was successful. Ernest Withers took that picture, but he was an informant for the FBI.
Yeah, that brings up something else you brought up in the film, and I'd like Nika to also give her thoughts, and that is you discussed what was actually revealed in, I think, 1971 in the burglary of the media FBI office, the existence of the COINTELPRO program, which was a program to not just surveil and not just monitor, but was a program to disrupt through any means necessary, violence, as well as just sort of lies and distortions. So tell me about what you think, how that fits into the movie.
Well, that was part of their modus operandi. Right. I mean, that was what COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, was basically put together to do exactly what you said, Bernard, to infiltrate, to interrogate, to destroy organizations that they thought were trying to destroy America. That's why they had informants like William O'Neill in Chicago with Fred Hampton. That's why they had the informant in the SCLC. I would even say to you today that there's probably informants in the Black Lives Matter movement, because that's how far the FBI will go to keep monitoring organizations. Now, the question we should all ask ourselves, they're so involved in, infiltrating and interrogating and monitoring organizations. What happened on January 6th?
Well, that's a big question.
All of a sudden they didn't seem to be on top of the fact that there were people out there whose motivation was to storm the Capitol and assault the Capitol. Then this last summer when Black Lives Matter people were out there, they had a tremendous amount of force, National Guard out there across the Capitol steps. Nobody was going to breach the Capitol steps. What happened on January 6th?
Walked right in.
It's called the Hypocrisy of America.
Nika, you have any thoughts?
I think that in a way, and this isn't specific to America or to our times, but the institutional story and activity represents the face of American power. And so what I mean by that is the program established then by the FBI was not sort of just like thought of as a cultural, you know, it was a cultural artifact of the thinking of American people of the time. And this idea that we need to figure out what these people are doing because they are trying to dismantle America as we know it. And it was an outcrop of that. And the institution was authorized to kind of weaponize that subculture, that majority culture of our nation, and to weaponize it against everyone else who would threaten it. But it still persists. And so we have won certain laws. They talked about, for example, the Civil Rights Act, and we spend so much time trying to defend and keep folks from dismantling the laws that we won in the 60s and the 70s, that we have not really done the work to dismantle the structural racism that has been insidious in our institutions since then. It might not be as blatant as sending, you know, essentially spies in to spy on American people. But you see the way that our academic institutions operate, our political institutions operate. There is sort of a culture of if you stand against whatever entities represent white male power too forcefully or too aggressively or assertively, you are not assassinated necessarily in body, but your career is assassinated. Your reputation is assassinated. Mm-hmm. And your friends who may or may not look like you in gender identity or in race and ethnicity are constantly making decisions about whether or not they want to align with something that is seen by power structures as subversive. I mean, I experienced that in the vote at the House of Representatives that we did today on something as stupid as a rule about committee hearings. And it gets transformed into some kind of a nefarious, you know, representation of whether or not you're going to stand with the power structures and play along to get along or not, when that's not really what's going on. I mean, look at, okay, January 6th. And I can't speak to the FBI or what they're like. I have no knowledge of that. But I do know that we lost the white men too, who were up at the front of that. We lost both of the Kennedys. They will assassinate, they being those who are trying to protect a false sense of American identity as being equivalent to the whiteness of the 19th and early 20th century, will do anything to get rid of the folks that would try to challenge that and to make democracy available to everyone, as was the original dream in theory. But the voting debacle that inspired the January 6th events, what were the cities they were trying to discount the votes in? Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta. Yeah. Why was it believable to them that millions of votes in those cities were fraudulent? Because they were picturing Black people and immigrants casting those votes. And it was believable to them that, of course, like, those aren't legitimate votes. How could they be? You kept hearing people say, how could it be? How could those votes be legitimate? And then if you go over even to Massachusetts, where we had our policing debate last year, and we debated things like whether no-knock warrants should be applied in places where there were children and grandparents. And when I spoke to our body, I said, do you think about this question differently if you're imagining a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl and your white grandmother and little toe-headed Ricky and the little ginger-headed football captain over from Newton or whatever suburb you're in, and police coming in and knocking them down and knocking them around and killing them because they were scared. They thought they might have had something. Do you feel differently about that?
Okay.
And you should feel the same way about my kids.
Okay, good. We have a question in the chat box. I think is very good. It brings a lot of things together, a few things together. Boston is building a monument to MLK and Coretta Scott. Can you talk about how she had the courage to weather the FBI assault? And talk about what you learned about her strength. I mean, because it was quite amazing, the type of pressure that she was under, and she didn't crack.
Well, you see, she was extremely supportive of the movement and of her husband, Dr. King, and I think that's what comes through. I was saying to someone, though, someone was saying, shouldn't there be a film about Coretta Scott King? I said, absolutely, but the challenge would be if Coretta, you don't want to just tell a story from the distance of Coretta. You want to be able to tell a story that maybe Coretta left some kind of diary or book or journal that she would be telling her own story. That would make it a very special film. But we all know that she stood steadfast with the King and Abernathy and all the others. She was as much of a civil rights pioneer as any one of those people in the movement.
Yeah. We're getting towards the end of our time here, so I want to make sure I get in one particular question to you, Sam, and that is James Comey makes a cameo appearance in your film.
Yeah.
I wonder if you got any sense of what he thinks has changed in the FBI. I mean, I think we've been suggesting that not a whole lot has changed, except maybe PR. But what insights was he able to provide?
I think he believes, as you heard him say in the film, that period was, as far as he was concerned, was the darkest chapter in the history of the FBI. Now, I would challenge that. I would say there's probably even darker chapters in the history of the FBI, But remember, he was the director of the FBI for 4 or 5 years. Yeah. And basically, he said that letter that William Sullivan sent to Dr. King, to Coretta Scott King, he kept a copy of that letter on his desk. And when he talked to the new recruits, he would read that letter to them and tell them, this is what the FBI should not be about. Now, who knows what the FBI is like today? I mean, many of us, in the last 15 years had a very sort of negative attitude about the FBI. The interesting thing to me was that when Trump came into office, he was so negative on the FBI. I said, maybe the FBI isn't all bad. Because if Trump hates them, then they can't be all bad because I hate him. So who knows? I mean, listen, the FBI is still a very complicated organization. It's the national police. Their job is to continue the status quo of America, and whatever that means. It may not mean the same thing to them that it means to you or Nika or you, Bernard. That's their job, and that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I think it's also important to realize that the FBI, their evil actions were not limited to the 50s and 60s. I mean, it goes all the way back to the Bureau of Investigation that J. Edgar Hoover headed up. So
even Marcus Garvey.
Right.
So, yeah, Marcus Garvey. I mean, the FBI was, they were out there to do the country's bidding at that time.
So we have to look at the whole history and make sure history is not repeating itself.
That's
any
the
rate,
hope.
Yeah, that's the hope. As someone once said, history does repeat itself. First time is tragedy, second time is farce. And let's make sure we don't have a farce that will repeat. So I guess we're wrapping up. It's almost 8. Well, okay, we have a few more minutes. We have to wrap up around 8:55, correct?
Yeah, because I have to go back to my class. I'm teaching a class.
Right. Okay. Okay. Nika, so give me your thoughts in terms of, what should people learn from this film, in your opinion?
I think you said it in so many words, Bernard, that we don't have to be doomed to repeat history, but we will if we aren't relentless about facing the truth in ourselves and the fact that our country has not healed. I don't pin it on the FBI. That was a representation that had the rubber stamp of the American people. And as long as we are resistant to the idea that we ourselves are impacted by our history of genocide and racism in ways that cause us to perpetuate it, we will see these stories over and over again. And it's painful. It's painful to do the work, to cross various aisles and differences, the way that Martin Luther King and many others, and you said Coretta Scott King, there have been documentaries and tomes of books written on the many, many women whose names were not known, at the time, who were the foundation on which these great men stood on their shoulders. And they did that with power. And I like to say that a lot of the most powerful forces are invisible, and that's true in the work that we have to do to build trust across these divides. And it's ugly, nasty work. And it means admitting that our institutions not only are insidiously infected with racism and all other kinds of hate, but that we are perpetuating it as long as we don't ferret it out. And it's really boring work. It's not, most of us aren't filmmakers. Most of us are having like I have to look into the law and read lots of text and see like where are racist things happening because of the way things have been written by habit. And teachers have to look into their curricula, and city workers have to look into their policies. We have to do this hard work, or we'll just be representations of what the FBI was in those decades, perpetuating the horrors that we're at the same time at the other side of our mouth decrying.
Another question is in the chat box. Even though there may not be time in the film, Andrew Young said that he didn't believe that James Earl Ray assassinated Dr. King. Did he ever say who he thought was responsible? Do you have your own theory? Oh, that's a complicated question.
He didn't answer it, and that would be a whole nother film.
Yeah.
To get into the assassination, who was involved in the assassination of Dr. King.
So, any other final thoughts, Sam?
Well, I would just say that I think it's important for people to watch this film because it's a reflection of where this country's at today, and hopefully, again, the idea that if you watch this film and then go read some books, maybe you, as a young person, won't repeat some of the history that we saw happen in the 60s that we see happen in 2020, and that the next generation will understand that this is the only way America can change, to not repeat the history.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Sam Pollard and Nika Elugardo. And before I go, I'd like to thank IFC Films for providing this opportunity to view and discuss what I think is an incredible and very important film that I will watch again because I have little notes in my notes here of the time that important things happened in the film. And I'll go back and just make sure I've learned everything I need to learn. So great. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Enjoy your class, Mr. Pollard.
Thank you.
Yes. Teach some kids something.
I hope they're on the West Coast.